Hello, everyone. So we are here to discuss Passover. Okay, and Passover is two things for the main idea. Passover celebration, which if I'm saying this right, is Pesach or Pesach. Okay, is from April 22nd to April 30th, which is roughly right now. Okay, Passover is celebrated by Jews every year, and it is basically the anniversary of the miracles that occurred in the book of Exodus when God delivered the Jews out of Egyptian slavery as told in the Bible. Okay? So, on the first two nights of the Passover, so that would be April 22nd and April 23rd, okay, just the first night in Israel. So basically, when you're not in Israel, it's 2 nights. When you're in Israel, it's 1 night. It's the first night. Okay, they hold something called a Seder. Okay, and Seder is basically a Passover meal. So when Jesus held the Passover dinner, that is what would have been known as a Seder. Okay, a Passover meal. If you remember, right before he was crucified, okay, they held a Passover dinner, if you will, in the upper room of the building. I remember that much, okay? And then he was crucified right after that, okay? So that's one of the things. They hold a Seder. Candles are lit as well. And they enjoy a ritual-rich, meaning a very ritualistic 15-step feast, okay, which basically centers around the idea of telling the story of Exodus, okay. Some of the highlights that during Passover week include drinking 4 cups of wine, dipping veggies or vegetables into salt water. Children also tell storytelling by asking the 4 questions, if I'm saying this right, as the Ma Nishtana. Ma Tishtana, I think it is. And what it is the 4 questions. And I will try to open up this page so we can look at the 4 questions. And of course it's in Hebrew. But the 4 questions in English is, on all nights we need not dip even once, and on this night we dip twice. The second one is, on all nights we eat leavened bread, which is basically cracker, known as matzal. Matzal. It's unleavened bread eaten on Passover. Now, prior to Passover, what they would do is they would go through their house and they would throw out and get rid of all bread that uses the yeast to make it rise. Okay, so matzah, I guess it is a kind of cracker-like bread. Okay, and on this night, only matzah. They only eat matzah. Okay, on all nights we eat various vegetables, and on this night, bitter herbs, okay? And on all nights, we eat sitting upright or reclining, and on this night, we all recline. So those are 4 questions that the kids would basically say in their thing, and I think it's called the Ma Nishtana, and they eat metzah, which is a cracker-like food. So think like crackers, basically. So there's no yeast in it, which doesn't make it rise up. Okay, and it reminds them of when the ancestors left Egypt. They had no time to allow bread to rise up, and they had bitter herbs because you basically ate whatever happened to be around, and they were singing late into the night. So beginning on the evening preceding, meaning before, Nisan 15, which is their calendar, Nisan 15, Passover lasts for 8 days in the diaspora, which is basically the rest of the world, and 7 days in Israel. Now, if we want to learn why that is, we will do so. So let's look at why. Okay, so why do they celebrate holidays for 2 days in diaspora? I understand that in ancient times the rabbis decreed that Jews in the diaspora should celebrate holidays for 2 days because of some confusion about the correct day to celebrate. So that's why they do that. The answer is good. We asked the custom of celebrating 2 days did not stop almost 2,000 years ago when the Jews started using a fixed calendar as opposed to determining the months based on the observations of the new moon. Okay. Now you might be wondering what is diaspora. So let's search Google to figure out. Diaspora is the dispersion or the spreading of a people from their original Holy Land. So basically, diaspora is when, in this case, the Jews being spread out, having to move to other countries, move to other places, and not being able to live in their own homeland of Israel. Okay, so basically, if a Jew was not in Israel, they were to do it on 2 days because of the fact that many of the calendars are not accurate to the Jewish religion and Jewish faith. Okay. On Passover, Jews may not own or consume chametz. Chametz is probably, if we look at chametz, it's probably that bread that is risen, but it's spelled as hametz or chometz, and it's any food product made from wheat, barley, rye, oats, or spelt that has come into contact with water and been allowed to ferment and rise up. Okay, so they basically avoid all breads and things like that rise up because of yeast and things in it. So knock it off. Okay, so they do not consume that. This includes various breads, pastas, cakes, and cookies. Okay. Prior to this holiday, homes are thoroughly cleansed for Passover. Kitchens are purged, okay, and made kosher, if you will, is the word. And the remaining chametz, which is the bread yeast, it's burned or sold away. Okay. Following the intermediate days, when work restrictions are somewhat relaxed, this bread remains forbidden. We celebrate the final 2 days of Passover just the same way, but 1 day in Israel. So it's shortened in Israel, but in the rest of the world it's made longer because of the fact of the calendars, during which they look forward to the future redemption through Messiah. Now, you have to remember, hello, Sister Rubelin, you have to remember, a lot of the Jews don't acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Messiah. So according to them, a lot of the Jewish culture, a lot of them still do not believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Now, many have come to the faith, and that is a wonderful thing, that much of Israel has become saved. But much of Israel still does not know who Christ is, does not believe in Christ, does not allow Christ, and they still believe in waiting for the Messiah. Okay? And this all goes back to the fact of when Christ came, it was a very different picture that was portrayed of what was the purpose of the Messiah in comparison to what the people wanted, which was to be free from government rule, to have their own country, to have their own establishment, to basically have their own laws and rules apply to their own country and everything like that. So they thought the Messiah would come to release them from all bondage physically. But the Messiah actually came to free us from all bondage spiritually. Okay? Passover is important to Jews, and it is celebrated, and it celebrates their birth as a nation. Okay? So let's look at some of the links that we have. So let's first of all looking at preparing the kitchen. So in the Passover, every part of the homes are cleaned for Passover. They clean everything. Basically, think like spring cleaning, where you clean the house top to bottom. But they pay special attention to the kitchen, okay? Because that's where most of the bread that is risen hangs out, okay, during the year. And they get rid of this bread because they're not allowed to have it in the house during that time, okay? The dishes and the utensils. Today, most of the most of the homes that observe the Passover have a special set of dishes that they use specifically during Passover, okay? And these are not used on any other time. It's like you're going to find that out in a lot of Jewish homes. They have specific silverware and things that they use on specific holidays, okay? Only. And it is basically for the ritual cleansing of the house. It gets rather complex or complicated. You'll need to talk to an actual rabbi about what particular utensils there are, or you can click this link of kosher procedures. So basically, I'm kind of skimming this. Basically, kosher utensils are the kinds of utensils that cannot be koshered at all. Include china, pottery, enamel cookware, items that cannot be fully cleaned, such as sieves, graters, food grinders, pocket knives, etc. Okay. Also cannot be koshered, neither can items that are likely to be damaged by heat, such as knives with glued on handles. Okay. And I guess the general idea is to cleanse everything in your home as best as you can and basically make it holy, if you will, and make it sanctified, something along that route. But they really do a very in-depth job of doing this. And they take all of this chametz, which is basically bread or any sort of grain that has yeast in it that makes it rise up, right, and get larger. That is put into a fire and it's burned or it's sold, okay, which is the act of koshering the house and getting rid of all this stuff. Thank you to the two watchers that I see watching. I know one is Little Mama, don't know who the other one is. And they basically do this for everything. And not only that, but they immerse themselves and the utensils in water for 24 hours. Basically, they soak these items for 24 hours, okay, which is interesting, okay, and they make it as perfectly clean as they possibly could for a 24-hour period, okay, and there's like a whole list of, I'm looking at this thing, there's a whole list of rules about, you know, what you do and how you do it and stuff. I won't go into too much detail about that, because unless you're actually trying to observe this, you don't really need to know, okay. Now, basically, I'm trying to look at this more in depth for you and talk about the things that you don't know. So it was commemorating the Jews coming out of, or the Israelites coming out of slavery from Egypt, which is basically the story of Moses and Pharaoh in the Bible, in Exodus. And in Hebrew, it is known as Pesach, I think, if I'm saying that right. Pesach. And it means to pass over, which is why they call it Passover. Okay? Because God passed over the Jewish home. So they're talking about when the plagues fell on Egypt, one of the last plagues to occur, if not the last plague, was God himself, the Spirit of God coming down into Egypt, passing over the homes that had the blood of the lamb over the doorposts. And any house that did not have that, the Spirit of God went into that house and killed the firstborn. Okay? And that is what's called the Passover Eve, or the Eve of Passover. Again, I see 2 viewers again, so thank you for whoever's watching. I hope you get some learning about this, okay? Basically, Passover history in a nutshell, as I said, as told in the Bible, after many decades of slavery to the Egyptian pharaohs, during which times the Israelites were basically made slaves. They were treated horribly, and there was many horrors or sufferings that occurred. God saw his people in distress and sent Moses to Pharaoh with a message: set my people, or let my people go, set my people free, any of that kind of stuff, so that they may serve me. And despite many warnings, Pharaoh refused to listen to God's command. God then sent upon Egypt 10 plagues, afflicting Egypt, okay, and destroying everything from their livestock to their crops and everything else, okay. At the stroke of midnight on Nisan 15, the eve of Passover, in the year 2448 from creation, which is basically 1313 BCE, God visited the last of the 10 plagues on Egypt, killing all the firstborn. That's God coming down in his spirit, passing over all the homes, looking for the ones that had the blood of the lamb on it, passing over those, which is where they get the name Passover, and then going into the other homes, okay? And we will learn all about this as we learn the chapters in the Old Testament here soon, okay? And he basically chased his foremost slaves out of the land, is what Pharaoh did. Pharaoh resisted and was broken. The Israelites left in a hurry. In fact, that the bread they baked, this is where they get the idea of the cracker-like bread, baked as provisions for the way, meaning for the traveling in the desert, did not have time to rise up, which is why they have the thin cracker, because they're trying to basically repeat what the Israelites did in coming out of the desert, and not having actual bread, but having bread that was like cracker. Okay. Forms of this type of bread you see in the world today, such as taco shells, and of course my cat. Thank you. You wanted to say hi. Okay. And so taco shells, burrito shells, any kind of shell like that, things along that line. It's basically the general idea is any kind of bread or grain or anything along that lines that come from grains, come from anything assorted with that, and that does not or is not allowed to rise, is where they get this cracker like bread from. Okay, so 600,000 adult males plus many-born women and children. So that's how that gives you a number. Okay, left Egypt on that day, and they begin their traveling to Mount Sinai, which is where the Ten Commandments were given, and their birth as God's chosen people. This is basically the birth, and I guess the birth of, you are my people, I'm going to save you. You will now be a new nation, kind of thing. Okay. Now, in ancient times, the Passover observance included the sacrifice of what's known as the Pashal lamb, if I'm saying that right, which was roasted and eaten at the Seder, which is the first or second night, depending on where you are in America, in the world. This lamb was eaten on the first night of the holy day holiday. So whether you were in America or not. So let's say Jewish in America, they would have done it tonight. They would be eating that lamb tonight. Killing that lamb, eating that lamb tonight. Okay? But most likely it would probably not have been killing it. They probably went to the store, bought the lamb, used the lamb. How they exactly do it, I don't know. but that's the general idea. Okay, and so if you're in Israel, it would happen on the same night, but it would be shorter because basically the calendar there versus the calendar here, kind of thing. And this was the case until the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the 1st century. Okay. I think that's Lolit, I believe, is the second person. Anyway, now if you want to, they have a link for the full Passover story, which we can open and talk about. Okay. Passover celebrated is basically in two parts: the first 2 days and the last 2 days. Basically, the latter 2 days are commemorating the splitting of the Red Sea. Okay, and those are full-fledged holidays. Okay, holiday candles are lit at night, and the Kiddush, which is basically a prayer or sanctification, is recited, and the holiday meals are enjoyed on both nights and days. Okay, and they don't go to work, they don't drive, they don't write, and they don't switch on and off electrical devices. Okay, they are permitted to cook. We are permitted to cook and to carry outdoors, and they have a whole section about that. So basically the same general idea of how the Jews would basically set this temporary outdoor perimeter that was kind of tight, and so they would end up being outside a lot of the time in this thing. We talked about this many times, that they would erect these outdoor tents, and they would stay in them, and they would set up this kind of like boundaried off area. So think about how, like, when they hold concerts or things, they like section off a piece of the city. Same thing, basically. Okay. And the middle 4 days are called, see if I said this right, Chol Hamud, if I'm saying that right. Okay. And it is the weekdays during the festival, basically. Okay. And it is basically the days in between Passover and the Sukkot. Okay. Is what it is. And it's during that time that most forms of work are permitted to happen. Okay. Now, one of the general rules is no chametz, which is the bread that rises up. Okay. So we did talk about that already, so I'm going to kind of just gloss over that. And it would also include many alcoholic beverages. Okay. As we know, the Jews are known for glasses of wine from the fruit and stuff like that, so that's a big one. Chametz is basically a flat, unleavened bread. Okay. And it is a mitzvah, or basically a commandment, to partake of this cracker-like substance on the 2 Seder nights. Okay, during the holiday. And the Seders are the highlight of the Passover, basically. It's observed as the first 2 nights of the holiday, basically, or the one night in Israel. And it has this is where the 15-step family-oriented traditions come from. And they have a ritual-packed feast. They have a huge feast, kind of like Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving dinner. Okay, and the focal point of this Seder, or these days, okay, is eating the matzah, eating bitter herbs to commemorate the bitter slavery endured by the Israelites, drinking 4 cups of wine or grape juice, which is a royal drink to celebrate newfound freedom. That's where the drinking part comes in. And they recite the Haggadah, if I'm saying that right, which is basically the story of Exodus from Egypt. So basically reciting the story of how the Israelites came out of Egypt and all of that stuff. And then the children ask the traditional 4 questions, and then they celebrate the Passover. And it's celebrating the great miracles that God displayed in freeing the Israelites. Okay, is the general idea. And it is very, it's very fancy. So let me flip the camera around real quick and show you this video. I'm not going to play the video, but I mean, if you just look at this video, they have like eggs, they have specific stuff, vegetables dipped in stuff. This is the cracker-like bread, and it actually breaks up like cracker. They have their little book, and you can see the fanciness. They take this thing very seriously. Okay. So I just wanted to show you what that specific thing looked like. Okay. Anyway, so we've basically got that done as far as what is this specific holiday. Okay. So what is chametz? This is the stuff that they burn, they get rid of, they throw out. So it refers to any food or drink that contains leavened grain, such as wheat, barley, rye, oats, spelt. It is included in breads, cakes, cookies, cereal, pastas, and most alcoholic beverages. Okay, chametz must be completely removed from your possession, or sold to a non-Jew, so a person that's not a Jew, before Passover. Okay. And basically, they have a thing of like how to sell it and stuff like that, where to sell it, and they have like the whole connection thing. We already went over what the matzah is, or matzo, the cedar, which we went over. Okay. So then they have the upcoming Passover days, the upcoming Seder days. So the Passover dates are April 22nd through the 30th, which is right now for this year. The Seder nights, which is the first two nights of the Passover, are April 22nd and April 23rd, but only April 22nd for Israel, people in Israel. If you're in the rest of the world, it's April 22nd and April 23rd. So that's doing that part of it, okay? I think I went over the Exodus story, but I'm just checking real quick of this, okay? Let's kind of like sum this up really quick. Jacob and his children had arrived in Egypt to be close to Joseph. He was second in command to King Pharaoh, which is talk about Joseph, and he had saved his people of Egypt as well. That's going back to the story of Joseph being sold into slavery and becoming a second to Pharaoh and then saving that from the famine. Okay, Jacob and his children were settled in the city of Goshen. Their numbers grew. Okay, and basically it moves from the story of Jacob and Joseph to the story of being in slavery in Egypt. The Egyptians basically become a Jewish problem for the Egyptians, and they basically enslaved the Jews. And this is where we get the whole idea of Pharaoh, and for 400 years this occurred. Okay, and then we get into the whole thing of Moses and Pharaoh trying to gets frightened, and he tries to kill so many of the babies. This is where we get the story of Pharaoh throwing the babies into the Nile and them being eaten. Okay, and basically some of the Jewish people refused his order and tried to save the newborn males. And this is how Moses basically was saved. And Moses basically went into the Pharaoh's wife area as a child in a basket and in a cradle, and then he grew up as kind of like a prince of Egypt. Moses did. And then after he killed one of the people and learned about his past, he ended up running away from this and abandoning this position. And then years later, he came back as the person that God has chosen to help deliver the Israelites out of Egyptian rule. Okay. So there's a whole story here. I won't go into great detail. I just kind of summed it up for you in basic terminology. They also clean the stove and everything else. Going back to the cleansing part, they also clean all of that. They heat certain parts of the stove until they are red hot. And basically what they do is they have this kind of like flat iron thing, and they sit that on top of the stove during the holiday so that they're not actually cooking, but they can keep foods warm in pots or stuff like that. And that is what's used. Okay, so they clean ovens and stoves, and they cover whatever tops of the stove with aluminum foil afterwards for the duration of the Passover. They might use a self-cleaning oven. They clean down the doors and all this stuff. Microwave ovens are cleansed. Okay. And they turn on the microwave and let it steam heavily, turn it off and wipe it out the inside. So then they have like rules in this reading about how to actually use the microwave as during the Passover. Okay. They have cleansing about the sinks that they do, refrigerators, freezers, cupboards, closets, tables, countertops, everything. Full house clean. Tablecloths, napkins, cars, garages, etc. All sorts of stuff. They literally clean their entire house. So it's basically for them a spring cleaning. Okay? Basically. And I think we kind of went over it for the most part. So let me double check. The last 2 days. Okay, so the last 2 days of the Passover is what we have not actually looked at for the most part. The Passover history we kind of looked at, dealing with the Egyptian thing. And they have a lot of like little things that you can click on. Passover appetizers, desserts, soups, salads, the Seder meal, the traditional. Like this site really goes into great detail to following all of the procedures. And this was kind of what God, when he came as Christ, was talking about. That you pay more attention to the rituals and the things like that than you do to actually making your heart right with God. So now let's look at the last 2 days of the Passover. So we're going to look at the 7th day and the 8th day. Okay? So that's what we're going to look at. So the last 2 days of the Passover is known as the Yom Tov holidays, capping. It's basically like capping or the celebration or the ending of the week-long celebration that begins with the Seder. And whether you're in Israel or not, that really doesn't matter. In Hebrew, the last 2 days are known as, see if I say this right, Shvi Shel Pesach, known as the 7th of Passover, and Echaran Shel Pesach, okay, which basically, Pesach means Passover. Echan Shel Pesach means the final day of Passover, is the last 2 days of the Passover week, respectively. They find candles, lighting times for the city that you can do. For this year, it begins before sunset on April 28th, okay, and it ends after nightfall on April 30th. Candles are lit after night has fallen, and they are lit from a pre-existing flame. So what they would do is, for this candle lighting, is they would light a flame before the lighting ceremony or whatever, and they would keep it burning, and then from that flame is how they would end up lighting the other candles. Okay. So what happens on the 7th of Passover? So on this day, the children of Israel left Egypt, where they had served as slaves for generations, despite his original stubborn refusal. So I'm talking about when they actually left Egypt on this day, supposedly. And 3 days later, when the Israelites failed to return, Pharaoh realized that they were gone for good, and he went after them. And this is where we get the parting of the Red Sea. So this particular day is celebrating what was happening at the Red Sea. Okay, so the Israelites are trapped. There was nowhere to go but into the sea. Then God commanded Moses to raise up his staff, and the sea split, allowing the Israelites to comfortably cross on dry land through the Red Sea. When the Egyptians attempted to follow the Israelites across, the sea came crashing down on them. The chariots, the riders, the horses, all perished in the churning sea. And if you don't believe this is true, go to the Red Sea, dive into the Red Sea. You can actually find the chariots still there. Okay? Overwhelmed with gratitude, Moses led the Israelites in singing the song of the sea. Okay, the song of the sea is a prayer. It's basically a prayer service song. And it's basically, this would go way into the wee hours of the morning, or early in the morning of the 7th of Passover. And it's basically the parting of the Red Sea. As I said before, many people have the custom to remain awake the entire night preceding, meaning before, the 7th day of Passover. And they have the habit of studying the Torah, that's the first 5 books of the Old Testament, as a way of thanking God for the miracle that he did at that time. And then they read it again during the morning services on the 7th day. The Torah reading, again, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, includes the biblical narrative of the miraculous salvation at the sea and the song that they should sing. Okay. On the 8th day of Passover, which is the exact final day, they do what's called sip and dip. Sip and dip. Many people have the custom to make sure that the cracker-like bread does not come in contact with moisture. Okay, lest some leftover flour become leavened. So it's basically, don't allow any of this cracker-like substance to become leavened. Okay, on the 8th day, this restriction is relaxed, and the cracker-like substance can be mixed with water and other liquids to create a Passover favorites known as matzah balls. Okay. Now that might actually sound familiar to you. Hear it again. Matzah balls, meatballs, matzah balls, meatballs. You get the idea. The difference is meatballs are made with meat. Matzah balls are made with grain. Okay. And matzah bray. Okay. During the morning services on the 8th day, they do what's called the Yitzkor memorial prayers. And if I hover over this Yitzkor word, it's called prayer for the souls of departed parents that are recited on these festival days. Departed parents, okay? Or departed relatives, okay? And then they do what's called a futuristic dining, known as the Baal Shem Tov, okay? And it is known, it's basically translated to mean master of the good name. And it is in honor of Rabbi Israel bin Elazar from 1698 to 1760, the founder of Chassidism, which I have no clue what that is. And it's remarked on the last day of Passover. And it's kind of like thanking the people that came before that helped establish a lot of these rules and customs and things that they had. And so one of the ways that they would honor this is by adding 4 cups of wine to the meal. And it is marrying or mirroring the cedars held on the first night. So it's kind of like a mirror image for the most part. So they have a meal at the end, a large meal at the beginning, a large meal at the end. Okay, and that is the basic general idea. Now, that is basically the general idea of that Passover. So, now that we have the 7th day and 8th day discussed, okay, that is the last days. The 7th day, the splitting of the sea. The 8th day, commemorating the final redemption yet to come from the Messiah, that they obviously did not understand who he is. I'm glad that you're still here. I was wondering if you were still here. Thank you for that thumbs up that I see. So then they have a collection of articles and videos, the book of their heritage, and then much other, like, I guess, readings and stuff like that. Okay? So I'm closing these down, going back to much of the other stuff. Okay? So on that final day, dipping vegetables into salt water, 4 cups of wine on that last day. And that's the basic general what Passover is. Okay? So for anyone who's not have watched this video, just for the record, Passover is not about Christ dying and being risen. That's Easter. Okay? Passover is the Passover meal, the celebration. So this would be the celebration example of when... So in the Bible, Jesus shares a Passover meal with his disciples in the upper room of a building. And you remember, he sends out his disciples and he goes, hey, go to this person, tell him the Lord requires your upper room. Okay? And this is the same Passover meal that is done where Jesus dips his bread in with Judas, and Judas makes that final decision to betray Jesus. Okay? It's that same exact time. So that moment in that story is when they were celebrating the Passover of God freeing the Israelites out of Egypt. And this happened right before Christ went to Calvary. So, in other words, the Jewish Easter occurred after Passover, not before Passover. Okay? So I just want to kind of make that clear. Okay? So that's why I did not celebrate Easter, okay, when they celebrated here in America, because it was not the actual Easter. Okay? But I believe I did give a video about that for you guys. So, anyways, thank you guys for watching this, whoever watches this. I hope that you've been enlightened about what Passover is, what it's about, how it's connected to the Old Testament, and the stories of the Old Testament, and why the Jews do it. Okay? So be blessed, take care, and I'll see you guys at a later time. We are still on break from jumping from the New Testament to the Old Testament. That is coming, but I do have a couple sermons that I want to give before that takes place. So just bear with me. Okay? Take care, guys, and be blessed.